Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen, and honorable guests. Welcome to the Plenary 2 session and Anti-Corruption Award of the 19th International Anti-Corruption Conference. My name is Kim Yeonjin, your MC for this session. It is my great honor to meet you all. IACC 2020 is now being live streamed for global attendees and simultaneously interpreted in 6 UN official languages and Korean. For the speakers on Zoom, if you need translation, please select the language by clicking the global icon on the bottom of the Zoom. As mentioned earlier, the live streaming is available in all 7 languages, including 6 UN official languages and Korean for all global attendees. You could choose language you want on the agenda page of the website. For your information, the studio in Korea has been complying with all the requested COVID-19 quarantine measures required by the government. The Plenary 2 session is being held under the theme of defending the truth, countering fake news and manipulation. So during the session, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them on chat window. For this session, we invited moderator Ms. Barbara Trionifi, Executive Director of International Press Institute. She will lead this session. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's all welcome.
Thank you very much, and good evening, and welcome to the plenary session 2 on defending the truth, countering fake news and manipulation. The panel discussion will last about 75 minutes and will then lead on to the Anti-Corruption Award ceremony, which is one of the highlights of this conference, when the winners of this year's award will be presented. Over the past years at IACC, we always spoke about the unique importance of journalists, or journalistic investigation in general, in revealing corruption, in generating public awareness about it, and generating also public pressure on those who are in charge of bringing about justice. As disinformation and misinformation and propaganda have been playing an increasing important role in our democracies, these have also affected the fight against corruption. The panel today will analyze how these trends have been affecting anti-corruption efforts, in particular how manipulation and disinformation has become a tool in the hands of the corrupt. But we also look at how we together can increase our leverage in the defense of truth seekers. A reminder to our audience to post your questions in the Q&A box, and I will try and take as many of them as possible after the introductory speeches. We have an impressive panel today. Let me introduce them. Ms. Jung Kang-ja is a representative of the People's Solidarity for Participatory Democracy of the Republic of Korea. Mr. Patrick Alley is the co-founder of Global Witness. Ms. Maria Teresa Ronderos is director and co-founders of the Latin American Center for Investigative Journalism, LIP. Mr. Tom Devine is legal director of the Government Accountability Project in the United States. And Ms. Juliana Van Gul is a Mexican documentary filmmaker who's currently living in Switzerland. And let me start with you, Juliana. If I may, one of your films is currently being shown at this conference as part of the Films for Transparency. The film is called Radio Silence and tells the story of a well-known Mexican journalist, Carmen Aristegui, who is regarded by many as a trusted alternative voice to the official propaganda, to the, alone fighting against the deliberate efforts of the governments to hide corruption, to bring about a different narrative, and also to hide the related drugs trade. To our audiences, actually, a reminder that you can watch the films through the IACC website, and it will be available for you to view for the next 2 days until December 4th. Maybe before turning to Juliana to tell us a little bit more about the film, I would like to show you the trailer. Please, Lina.
Estamos decidiendo reabrir nuestra transmisión para dar cuenta de una noticia trágica. Han asesinado a un gran colega, Javier Valdés.
There is a sad story. There is a Javier, there is a journalist named Javier. Javier was killed. We need to find justice for Javier. But there was a censorship on the state-owned broadcasting system, and people were deprived of the rights to listen to the radio broadcasting. So there was a president, and there were many articles about the president, and they were censored in the past. What I have to do is to play a role of a journalist, and in order to observe the democracy, we must work together. The corruption is rooted in Mexican politicians. It is prevalent, and the government, in order to win the election, has done many different negative practices. And if it is related to the drug, then we must find out what's actually happening in the country. And there were many actions that were taken against this journalist. So there was a novelist named Octavius, and these dictators, in order to implement the totalitarianism, has done many corrupt practices.
Thank you, and I strongly recommend our audiences to watch Radio Silence. IPI, the organization I represent, organized a screening last year when the film came out, and we got such positive feedback from our audience. So congratulations to Juliana. And maybe let me ask the first question to you. Why a film about a journalist? Why a film about Carmen Aristegui? And tell us a little bit how the idea for this film was born. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really honored to be with you today. Thank you to Roberto Perez Rocha. Thank you to Julia and to Lena from Films for Transparency for this wonderful invitation. It is wonderful for me to see people from so many disciplines gathering here around one subject. It is certainly one of the goals of documentary filmmaking. So thank you very much. So in order to tell you on how Radio Silence was born, I maybe should start by saying that Mexico is a country that where power was held for 72 years by one and only party, the PRA. And in that country, the media was also held by a monopoly called Televisa, something very similar to Globo, for example, in Brazil. And it is in this context that I grew up. And I remember that at some point when I was a teenager, this voice of Carmen Aristegui, we started to listen to her in my home. And she was different. Her discourse was different from what we were used to from Televisa. She was very straightforward, and she used to ask questions differently and invite people to her radio program to create debate. And I continued to listen to Carmen's voice when I left Mexico and I came here to Switzerland to do a master's in film studies and filmmaking. And I remember that in 2015, in March 2015, suddenly I woke up one day and her voice was missing. She had been fired, she had been censored from the media company where she had her news program. And a few people and her with her 18 people team that had been also fired were complaining and were asking for justice. And the important here the important thing here to say is that some months before this, Carmen and her team had revealed a huge corruption scandal where she proved that Mexican President Peña Nieto, so the former president of the country, had been giving a $7 million villa, a huge, beautiful white villa in the very luxurious neighborhoods of Mexico City. In exchange, it was given by a building company in exchange to an enormous contract of the building of a railway train that had to link Mexico City to a very important city in the north of the country. This journalistic investigation is called the White House of Enrique Peña Nieto, so the name of the president. Peña Nieto's term, during his term, many journalists had been killed in Mexico, and the situation of violence in the country was becoming really, really tense with the so-called drug war, or the war against the cartels that you mentioned, Barbara. This also huge scandal about 43 missing students from Iguala, and so many journalists being killed. When you could see the numbers were similar to a country in war like Syria. Mexico became one of the most dangerous countries for journalism. And it wasn't the first time that Carmen had been fired. And in the following days, so a huge movement of 200,000 people signed a document in order to get her back to her mic. And some others decided to raise their voice and denounce censorship and claim to the right of the audience to be informed. And I myself decided to, I was very angry at what was happening in Mexico, and I was really shocked. And I decided to transform this anger and this energy into something positive and something active, and to use the tools that I had, the tools of filmmaking. And I went to Mexico, I looked for her, and this is basically how the film was born. The rest of the story is told in the film.
Thank you so much, Juliana. It's really a fantastic story, and it also shows, as you said, how easy it is to silence journalists and those who reveal corruption, and yet you know how important the support of their audiences and of the public is. Maybe let me take it from there and to introduce one of our speakers, Ms. Jung Kanja, representative of the People's Solidarity for Participatory Democracy of the Republic of Korea, but also a standing commissioner of the National Human Rights Commission in Korea. I understand that Commissioner Jung is also active in support of gender rights and a visiting professor at the Inha Law School. Ms. Jung, thinking about the importance of truth in the fight against corruption and the many challenges that those who seek to bring out the truth are facing, how can an institution, for example, such as the National Human Rights Commission, support this struggle and support those who struggle to do this?
I'm very happy to meet you all. I'm Jung Kang-ja, co-chair of People's Solidarity for Participatory Democracy in the Republic of Korea. Today I want to talk about Korean civil society's anti-corruption movement and whistleblower protection movement. So how we have done in Korea will be my topic. Next page, please. So we have fought against the manipulation and fake news that were posted by big organizations or groups, and we must protect these public interest reporters or the whistleblowers. And Korea's civil society has taken very active activities to protect them.
그 얘기에 들어가기 전에 우리
But
한국
before
사회에
talking
대해서
about
좀
that, I have to
소개하고자
explain
합니다.
about the Korean
민주주의와
society.
급속한 산업화를
So
동시에
Korea
이루는
has
나라입니다.
achieved a very
최근에는
rapid pace of the industrialization and democracy at the same time. And thanks to the development of its democracy and the economic and cultural growth, we show very good examples and strongness when it comes to overcoming the COVID-19, which is a global pandemic issue. But if you look at the citizen movements in 1990s, and especially after the Korean War in 1950, the democracy movements in Korea were very hard and difficult. Just like you heard, Korea has overcome our fights against the military regime, and we could overcome in 1987. And after that, many different types of civic groups started to appear in the 1990s. So please allow me to introduce you those groups. So the People's Solidarity for Participatory Democracy that I'm leading right now is one of the most representative oversight groups on power. So we do the oversight works on those authorities with powers, and we also propose new policies for the social reform and realization of the participatory democracy, and to promote innovation and revolution in terms of the policies, law enforcement, economy, and finance, and etc. When we were established in 1994, we had very big incidents. The collapse of a very big bridge in Seoul and the collapse of a very big department store in Seoul as well. So these were actually caused by the corruption that were done by the government and companies. And this was reported very significantly in the Korean media. And at that time, the integrity score was 46.2 out of 100 assessed by the Korean people. So that is why Korea started to focus more on anti-corruption efforts in order to realize justice in our society. And this is when the TI was established. And our goals for the anti-corruption include the enforcement of the Anti-Corruption Act, protection of public interest reporters, and recovery of illegal assets, and organization of the oversight groups, and doing the campaign on anti-corruption. And in the anti-corruption campaign, 20,000 Korean citizens participated, and 151 National Assembly members signed the campaign. And through this campaign, the Corruption Prevention Act and Anti-Money Laundering Act were enforced, as well as our Act on the protection of the whistleblowers. And let's look into more details about the people's movement for the three major reformative legislations in 2000. As you can see, we had three major legislations that include the National Human Rights Commission Act, Corruption Prevention Act, and National Security Act. It may seem like they are not related, but the human rights, anti-corruption, and social justice are the basic foundation of the democracy, so they are the essential systems. So we started to work to lay this groundwork for the Korean society. And such solidarity movements were very natural in the process of the democratization in Korea. And as a result, in 2001, the National Human Rights Commission of Korea was established and Corruption Prevention Act was enacted. But unfortunately, we have not abolished the National Security Act yet. But we believe that these achievements were possible So thanks to the people's power-enabled proposal and passage of legislation.
고도로 관료화되어 있고 전문화되어 있는 국가나 공공기관,
So now more sophisticated and professionalized corruption by the state, public organization, and large companies cannot be detected by the external oversight or monitoring. There should be someone who report this corrupt practices inside. So someone needs to blow the whistle of conscience. We are getting better and better. However, once the identity of a whistleblower is disclosed, the fake news gets disseminated by the reported people and organizations. Sometimes there is an act of retaliation, and the public interest reporters have to carry a stigma, and sometimes they are kicked out of the work and they are isolated from the society. Sometimes they face civil or criminal lawsuit. The value of public interest whistleblowing should be protected, but at the same time, they should be a legal protection. In order to prevent the abuse of a fake reporting under the Corruption Prevention Act, we didn't allow the anonymous reporting. So that way, we weren't able to protect the public interest reporters, and that could be the obstacles to the spread of a public interest whistleblowing. That's why the PD, our organization, is trying to introduce various systems. For example, like a lawyer representation system, where the reporter's identity can be protected. So the area of a public interest whistleblowing include the waste of government budget, corruption of large companies, abuse of power by heads of local governments, corrupt in the third sector, high-ranking public official crimes, collusion between business and damage to fair trade, irregularities, and private schools. And due to the disclosure or exposure of identity or fake news and act of retaliation, sometimes the public interest reporter become the victim. In order to protect them, what we need to do is think about ways to return them back to jobs or society. And if the public interest reporters face the lawsuit, we also need to provide them legal assistance. And if they suffer from some psychological the damages, and we also need to provide medical assistance. And from the perspective of the civil activist or movement, it's a little bit problematic, because when we think about some issues that rise from with the changes of society, for example, like digital sex exploitation, Me Too movement, it's a very complex issue when it comes to protection of public interest reporters. And it is especially so in this unprecedented COVID-19 situation. It is not an easy task, but based on a public acceptance and expertise, we need to join forces to tackle this issue. From 1990 to 2019, we recorded 117 public interest reporters by PSPD, our organization. They are righteous people, so we need to treat them with respect and we need to protect them. That's why we made Righteous Persons Award and Whistleblowers Night. And we need to record reported cases, and also we made a record of why those people received our awards. But there are some missing cases, so we will continue to explore those cases. Now let me talk about the task that we need to pursue. There is a role of government. First, We need to focus on reform of the organization with power and democratic control. The PD introduced a special prosecutors system 23 years ago, and we suggested that there should be an independent evaluation measures for high-level officers' irregularities. So that's why we need to introduce high-level officer crime investigation office. And this establishment of this proposal of establishing this office will soon pass by the Korean parliamentary, and it is also part of the task asked by the citizens who participate in the civil rights candlelight vigil in 2016 and 2017, and it is related to the agenda pursued by the prosecution, police, and National Intelligence Service. At the same time, we need to strengthen the capacity of an anti-corruption dedicated organization. As you may know, this 19th International Anti-Corruption Conference is co-hosted by IACC. And there are a lot of roles that IACC can play in this anti-corruption activities. That's why there should be a greater authority and status given to the IACC. Next is about the role of civic groups. And civic groups try to focus on the scene, and they always try to be on the ground. They like to talk to the person engaged and involved, and they listen carefully, and they ask and ask again. They try to get the right perspective. So if there is any information or conclusion they get through their own activities, they should share that information with the government, and they should be monitored, and we will also help their the movement as well. So with that, I'd like to wrap up my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jung. And we'll talk more about whistleblower later in the panel. But now maybe let me turn to Patrick Alley. Patrick is co-founder of Global Witness, an organization that challenges abuses of power and in order to protect human rights through hard-hitting investigation as well as campaigning. Patrick, what are the main challenges that you see in revealing corruption? Also looking at this in the context of disinformation and misinformation, and how can we support those who, like you, do this?
Okay, I want to look at this. Thank you very much. I want to look at this through a particular lens. We're living in a very scary time. The world's political leaders since the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro have failed us, and those of us in the rich world have failed ourselves and our colleagues in the global south because we've refused to give up our excessive consumption. The result of that is that since Rio, we've hurtled into the 6th extinction event and into the heart of a climate crisis. Personally, I adhere to the Gaia hypothesis, which proposes that Earth and everything on it forms a self-regulating complex system, maintaining the conditions for life on the planet. And I think one of the latest manifestations of this theory is that just that when we utterly depend on the most visionary political leadership possible, we end up with a clutch of pedestrian and sometimes unhinged mediocrities in the thrall of big business, notably the fossil fuel industry. And a big part of how this came about is at the heart of the subject of this plenary, fake news and manipulation. Politicians as a breed have never been renowned for their total honesty, but Trump, Johnson, Bolsonaro, Putin, Erdogan, Orban and their ilk take this to a whole new level, and they've succeeded in profiting from their lies because of the powerful new weaponry at their disposal, and I'm talking particularly about social media. One of the chief impacts of this is the erosion of trust, resulting in division, really bitter division, which often explodes into extreme violence, but between and within nations, religions, political parties, ethnic groups. Not since the Cold War have I been as scared as I am now? My organization, Global Witness, along with TI and others and journalists, of course, have been pushing transparency, the truth, for over 25 years. It's the core of our methodology to get evidence that exposes a corrupt deal and use that to advocate for change. So what do we do when truth doesn't win the arguments anymore? I'd like to share a couple of quotes from a controversial media expert. A lie once told remains a lie, but a lie told 1,000 times becomes the truth. Or alternatively, if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. Facebook, Google, YouTube, Amazon and others are making vast profits, tracking and manipulating all of us on behalf of politicians and other interest groups. In the months before the US elections, President Trump started sowing the seeds for what I assume was a well-worked-out strategy, that postal voting, assumed to bring in more Democrat than Republican votes, was open to fraud. He had no evidence for this, but that doesn't matter because if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. And one of the impacts of his stance is the damage he's inflicted on trust. When Biden becomes president, millions of US citizens will not believe that he won fairly, that it was a fraud. In the immediate aftermath of the election, his supporters were already primed for what came next, leading to this situation where there's a movement trying to overthrow the results. There are demonstrations most days on the streets of Washington, D.C. by Trump supporters. Heavily armed bands of civilians turn up at rallies or even plan to kidnap state governors. Disturbingly, the media expert I mentioned before also said,
그리고 언론 지도자들도 얘기를 했었는데요.
Whoever can conquer the street will one day conquer the state.
이런
Someone's talking over me, I think? No, okay, I'll carry on. Whoever can conquer the street will one day conquer the state. For every form of power politics and any dictator-run state has its roots in the street. And that's where we are. Julius Caesar's adage, divide and conquer, is to quote a well-known dictator. It's incredible and truly frightening that the world's most powerful democracy was, and still is, vulnerable to a coup. So how does this manipulation manifest itself? According to the Center for Humane Technology, social media platforms are incentivized to amplify the most engaging content, which means tilting public attention towards polarizing and often misleading content. The more time users spend on the platform, the more data they reveal. The more data they reveal, the more detailed their profiles are. The more detailed the profiles, the more revenues for the platforms selling targeted advertising. Micro-targeting to the highest bidder means that manipulative practices that undermine democracies around the world are an integral part of Facebook et al.'s business model. The Republican National Committee says it has more than 3,000 data points on every US voter. The most popular news story of the 2016 US elections was fake. 3 times as many Americans read it and shared it on media accounts than they did the top performing article for the New York Times. This was the story that the Pope endorsed Donald Trump for president. A week before those elections, in a seemingly benign post, a Russian outfit called the Internet Research Agency paid Facebook to aim an ad towards users interested in African American history, the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, which included a photo of Beyonce's backup dancers. Black girl magic, the ad said. Then on election day, the same Russian group sent the same Facebook users an ad urging them to boycott the election. No one represents black people, don't go to vote, it said. During the 2019 UK general election, Conservatives pitched adverts about social services to women, while men received a Get Brexit Done message. During this campaign, there was also evidence of dark money in politics being used to buy online ads. For example, there were Facebook pages that appeared at the start of the campaign that had few likes, no financial transparency, and very big advertising spends. And most chilling of all, the 2017 genocide in Myanmar was exacerbated by unmoderated fake news, with only 4 Burmese speakers at Facebook to monitor its 7.3 million Burmese users. Yesterday, Global Witness published the results of an investigation as part of our new campaign focusing on digital threats to democracy. Ahead of the 2020 US election, Facebook announced a ban on new political ads, but said that the old ads would continue. What was the impact of this ban? Not much. In the week before the election, political ads were shown an estimated 5.3 billion times on Facebook, 5% more than the number that was seen before the ban. That means there were enough ad impressions for every adult in the US to have been shown the advert 20 times in the week before the election. Facebook made $110 million out of that, just 4% than they did the week before the ban came into place. We questioned Facebook and they told us they were combating misinformation because their political ads library was populated in advance of the election, i.e. journalists and NGOs could scrutinize it. Impossible, of course. Facebook's annual revenue in 2019 was $70.7 billion, the same as Venezuela, most from digital advertising. And Corporate Observatory Europe's report on big tech lobbying in Brussels reveals that in 2018 and 19, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Apple and Amazon spent 21 million euros on lobbying, twice as much as the car industry. So what can we do to address this? Well, the issue is too important to leave to big tech to solve through ineffective voluntary initiatives. Governments around the world need to step in and step up to hold these platforms to account. Representative Cicilline told the US House Judiciary hearing in July last year, and I quote, "These companies as they exist today have monopoly power. This must end. Some need to be broken up, all need to be properly regulated and held accountable." And we at Global Witness would endorse that. There needs to be a ban on the micro-targeting of political advertisements. Everyone should see the same advertisements. We commissioned a poll that suggests that 7 out of 10 Democrat and Republican identifying voters in the US would support such a ban. There should be transparency on who is paying for political ads. And a really important point, my last recommendation, a much greater investment into quality journalism, whether that's by independent investigative journalists, traditional media, or by NGOs. And to finish up, there's no greater or more dangerous corruption than the subversion of truth and democracy. It leads to political decisions that fly in the face of science, which in turn has presented humanity and the planet with environmental threats so great that if we don't take decisive action within the next 7 years, we're all toast. And it enables genocide, not just the Rohingya in 2017, but also the Nazi Holocaust. I'll finish with a couple more quotes from my media expert. Propaganda works best when those who are being manipulated are confident that they're acting on their own free will. And this is the secret of propaganda. Those who are to be persuaded by it should be completely immersed in the ideas of propaganda without ever noticing they're being immersed in it. You've probably guessed by now that the identity of this media expert was Adolf Hitler's propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, a recognized master of his evil craft. But he evidently has some very willing students today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick, and thank you for highlighting also how the platform had become an obstacle to the fight for transparency and truth. I think we all remember the time where the platforms were the only spaces available to journalists and activists as well in some parts, and now exactly. So we need to reconquer spaces that where truth can be disseminated. Let me turn, you mentioned the power of journalism, you mentioned the need to invest in quality journalism. Let me turn to Maria Teresa Ronderos, Director and co-founder of the Latin America Center for Investigative Journalism. You yourself also an investigative journalist based in Colombia. The center conducts cross-border collaborative investigations with media partners across Latin America. Maria Teresa, how do disinformation and propaganda affect the fight to reveal corruption in your part of the world?
Well, thank you, Barbara, and thank you to Roberto and everybody at the ICC. So we created CLIP, basically CLIP, which stands for Center for Latin American Investigative Journalism, with the aim to raise the power of investigative journalism in Latin America, to unite and strengthen and give it a technological strong arm to investigate abuse of all kinds of powers in Latin America, mostly political, but also private powers, very, very powerful, that are harming in a very deep and terrible way human dignity, the environment, and of course, the very fragile democracies that we have in Latin America and in many of the countries. So what we think is that it's a very difficult moment for investigative journalism in Latin America because we have the same old pressures that we used to have in the region, which is violence, threats, organized crime, governments pushing, taking advertising out, all kinds of old pressures. And then we have all these new pressures of the new ecosystem that Patrick described in such a wonderful way and terrible way. And so hence journalism is undermined from above, from very powerful forces, but it's also undermined from our own people sometimes. So before you would have that investigative journalists would be incredibly popular and people would know they are the ones who are telling the truth. And now a lot of these people, because they're being manipulated by this whole new ecosystem of lies, end up going against you. So you go against the government, you go against the people, or at least large chunks of people who are being manipulated. So this is something that we wanted to fight against. How do we find a solution for this? So one of the things we tried to do, and one of the things that we wanted to find is if we work together, if media and journalists, and in many cases NGOs and civic-minded experts and organizations in Latin America join and collaborate across border to investigate together and publish together, we can make our pieces shine in this complex and very risky information ecosystem. When you see a cross-border story, it has a better chance of earning trust, even among those whose this environment has made very, very distrustful of media. Diversity of media, of voices, of countries makes it much more credible. And this has been studied and has been found out in many parts of Latin America, like with some of the exercises that Brazil and Argentina and Mexico did of all the media coming together to inform during an election period, for example, and fact check and really expose untruth. So what do we want? If we publish all together the same stories at the same time in many countries of Latin America, it will have an impact. It will be seen. The second thing, the quality and the content improves. There is a lot of peer-to-peer verification. So those who have less qualification can learn from those who have more qualification when we work together. By building a data commons that crosses borders, it makes our capacity to investigate and to cross data much, much faster. And so we can work we can identify the same corrupt agent from one part to the other. By comparing and contrasting an issue beyond borders, we also can find much better and see much better how the system is broken. What is it that is not working? What is it that it's actually a pattern that it's very dangerous, that is being repeated from one country to the other? Because, in Latin America, there has been a lot of cutting heads of journalism that goes and takes off the minister, takes off the president. But this kind of journalism only increases distrust in many ways, because then another corrupt agent comes and takes the place. So how do you actually expose things so that you can see what is wrong in terms of the system? So one of our investigations that we have done, for example, have to do with how religious powers and religious leaders that are abusing their power are actually having a huge impact in the political agenda, and not always for the people, but in many ways for their own ends of power and wealth. So I think that if people get sick if they only eat junk food, societies get sick if they only consume junk information. But if you want to eat veggies, you have to make it much more interesting and much more appealing. You cannot go out with large chunks of information. And this is also possible with this cross-border. So we have made an effort to do really good productions of our stories so that they can look that they are engaging, that we are using the different formats. And this is costly. And as you know, in Latin America, many parts of the world, media are having a lot of trouble with their income and with their business model. So by creating economies of scale, when we do these cross-border investigations, it makes it much more possible to do very expensive investigations that no media single outlet would do, but at the same time produce them in a way that they're appealing, that they're interesting, that people would like to see them and to engage with them. And the last thing I wanted to comment is that we have discovered, and this we have done in a very beautiful but also harmful way, which is that working together keeps us safer, but especially we feel safer. I've heard from a lot of our colleagues, we've only been around for 1.5 years, but we feel that a lot of our colleagues tell us we feel safer when we work with you. We can tackle a very, very difficult problem, tackle a very strong power, and these are little outlets. Most of the good or the best investigative outlets in Latin America are small investigative teams, digital teams, not with lots of money or lots of power or anything. But they don't feel alone. They can tackle because we feel together. We make a big group of 15 or 10 or 12 media working together to tackle a dangerous story. So for example, we got into the story of Miroslava Bridge, precisely related to what Juliana just chose. She was a journalist murdered in Mexico because she was ousting the ties between politics and organized crime. And in order to investigate that, we joined a huge group of Mexican journalists who didn't have to even say their names, and we could keep them safe because there was a lot of other media in the region. And we made a huge investigation about how the judicial process was completely flawed. Collaborations also create solidarity among journalists and create very tight relations. And also we protect stories, and we learned this the hard way. In many cases when we were doing an investigation, and in the process, one of the media directors, because of local pressures, said, no, we're not going to run that story, because there was already an agreement to run it all together. He couldn't go back. He had to publish. So it goes against self-censorship. In another case, one of the journalists was fired because of the kind of journalism this journalist was doing, and still his story could be published because we were all publishing together in different countries, in different places. So this is, I think, a strong way of making the truth more massive, more attractive, and hard to quash and hard to silence. It's much more difficult to talk back when you have 15 media outlets producing stories at the same time in different countries. What is the big challenge we have? We need to learn and to grow and to work with those who know how to investigate disinformation, how to know who are actually creating and producing these stories and how do they work. We know now a little bit better which are the, because we know they create sites now, at least in Latin America, they're creating news fake sites that look very appealing and look very truthful. That's what exactly they did in Brazil. And then they start spread out messages that appear very innocent, but that would lead you to that, would take you to that site, and immediately you get hooked with lots and lots of, conspiracy theories, and of course, very well tailored to people's fears, which is how these people thrive. So we need to uncover how this works, and this needs technology and know-how and getting together with people like everybody who's listening today, making joint ventures to really get into that and how this works in Latin America. And the other thing we need is more support and find a way to find how do we support these small media investigative outlets all over Latin America that have very little money, and if they could have a little more resources, the difference they could make to really tackle abuse of power, which is what has created a lot of suffering, carnage, and a lot of poverty and a lot of social differences in Latin America. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria Teresa. Thank you also for bringing something positive and with your exceptional work. And you're absolutely right. We know that very often it's the small independent news media, it's the local news media that makes a difference. And journalists used to work as lone wolves. Now they had to learn to work cooperatively in order to have their voices heard. Let me move to Tom Devine. Tom is legal director of the Government Accountability Project in the United States. Tom, I understand you have assisted over 7,000 whistleblowers in defending themselves against retaliation. And also, you've also led campaigns to pass or defend 37 national or international whistleblower protection laws. We know that investigative journalism wouldn't exist without whistleblowers, and yet, if possible, whistleblowers enjoy even less protection than journalists. Tell us a little bit about the challenge, but also how you are winning this battle. On to you, Tom.
Thank you, Barbara. We're in the midst of a global legal revolution for freedom of speech where it counts the most, using the truth to challenge abuses of power that betray the public trust. In 1978, the United States was the first country to get a national whistleblower law. The second wasn't until 1998 in Great Britain. Now we have 48 nations with national statutes. That's swelled to 62 countries with free speech rights, thanks to the EU Whistleblower Directive from last December. There's over 100 nations that have sectoral whistleblower laws, which cover one portion of the economy or another. But are these rights worth the paper they're written on? Whistleblower laws are free speech shields. If you go into battle with a metal shield, it's dangerous, but you've got a fighting chance to live. You go in with a cardboard shield, no matter how beautifully it's decorated, you're going to die. And so to identify which laws are metal shields, a Government Accountability Project has just completed a study with the International Bar Association. It should be out in another week or two from production, and we'll put up the link to trace it. This study, in the study, I looked at a comparison of national whistleblower laws with global best practices to see how the rights are on paper. My partner, Samantha Feinstein, recruited and supervised a vast global network of NGOs to check their track records, see how the rights are actually working in reality. I think it's helpful just to give a little bit of a summary preview of our results. The policies that were the most effective, the European Union directive really led the field, but Australia, the United States, Serbia, and Ireland all complied with more than 75% of the 20 best practice criteria. Canada and Lebanon were the weakest. They complied with 1 out of 20 criteria. What was really interesting to me is that 47 out of the 62 nations that have whistleblower rights now are broader than just protecting against workplace harassment. They also provide a legal defense against criminal or civil liability, or protect family members, go against violence to those who are associated with whistleblowers. Rights on paper are not the same thing as rights in reality. Look at Australia. Their 2013 law for government workers is one of the world's strongest on paper. But there have only been 3 decisions. 1 was settled, whistleblowers lost 2, and the 2 that they lost, they had to pay the attorney fees of the employers. Not a very effective protection. So let's look at the track record. The laws are getting results. 21% of whistleblowers won decisions on the merits. Significantly more obtained relief through informal settlements. And 40 years ago, that would have been 0%. But they're not close to effectively providing justice. First, the countries that use the laws the most have the worst track records. The US weighs in at 10%, Great Britain at 13%. Second, 59% of nations did not have any reported decisions under their laws, which means there's either a horrible lack of transparency or they're almost non-existent in terms of usage. Third, there's dysfunctional delays. It's taken over 10 years in some cases to get a decision. And fourth, the remedies are so weak that oftentimes whistleblowers still lose by winning. Bottom line, there's a lot of work left to be done before these rights provide reliable justice. However, we're in the midst of a relentless paradigm shift to provide legal rights to whistleblowers. Why? Well, that gets to the questions for our panel. How have they impacted the fight against corruption? Well, that's easy. Getting results. They're making a difference. In the United States, our False Claims Act, which allows whistleblowers to file suits challenging fraud in government contracts, is America's most effective anti-corruption law. It's increased the average annual recoveries against that type of fraud from $10 million to $1.5 billion annually. And it's getting better and better. The last few years, it's been over $3 billion annually, thanks to whistleblowers. Or the European Commission. Several decades ago, Auditor Paul Van Buchanan exposed systematic bribery for all EC procurement. That forced the resignation of all the commissioners. Or the World Bank, where President Wolfowitz's global campaign against corruption in the third world was derailed when whistleblowers exposed that he was leading systematic corruption at the bank, enforced his resignation. Unsafe drugs for consumers. Food and Drug Administration scientist David Graham exposed that the super painkiller Vioxx was a killer painkiller and had been covered up due to corruption by FDA and the industry. When the truth came out, they had to take it off the market. And the unnecessary fatal heart attacks. Over 40,000, about as many Americans died in the Vietnam War. From a drug our government said was safe, that stopped. Or illegal surveillance. Thanks to Edward Snowden, we got the USA Freedom Act, which outlawed the practice of blanket domestic surveillance, with Big Brother moving into the households of almost every American family. In Macedonia, similar whistleblowers on surveillance sparked the fall of a government. Financial corruption on a massive scale, the LuckLeaks case. Tax evasion through money laundering, the Panama Papers, military casualties. Marine Science Advisor Franz Geil cut the casualties from landmines in Iraq and Afghanistan for U.S. troops from 60% to 5% after he revealed that due to corruption, we weren't delivering armored vehicles which would work and which had already been paid for, but weren't being delivered to help the troops or the environment. Whistleblowers have stopped completion of nuclear power construction or activities that threaten meltdowns, which would have trumped Chernobyl or Fukushima. They ended censorship of climate change research in the United States. They forced the shutdown of toxic incinerators that were burning arsenic, dioxin, lead, heavy metals right next to churches and schoolyards. The COVID-19 crisis that's challenging the whole world. Thanks to Dr. Rick Bright in our country, we didn't have mass distribution of malaria drugs that were irrelevant for COVID and possibly dangerous for people who weren't designed to be treated for. Jay Brainerd was a federal security director. He exposed at our airports, due to complete defiance of CDC public health standards, that government employees were the catalyst to make the airports the primary victor for the initial wave in the United States of the pandemic. Thanks to Mr. Brainerd, the airports were cleaned up and they're not a cause anymore. Or there's human rights abuses. Thanks to a customs inspector, the time when visitors entering the United States could be detained without evidence and not allowed to talk to a lawyer or their family, it's like their bodies were properties of the United States, was shrank from 4 days to 2 hours. But what happens when we don't listen to whistleblowers? Look at the last 3 financial crises that have dragged the rest of the world down because of problems in the United States. 1990s, the savings and loan debacle. Around the millennium, the scandals with Enron and MCI that led to an economic implosion because they were cooking the books and deceiving the shareholders. Or the subprime mortgage scandals most recently. In every case, there were whistleblowers who were exercising the freedom to warn, to try and prevent that. And because we didn't listen, there were tragic consequences. I think the point is clear. Whistleblowers have always been the Achilles heel of bureaucratic corruption because they're the human wild card. But they're changing the course of history more than ever before. And that leads to the second question. How do we counteract manipulation and disinformation? Well, the magic words are consequences and solidarity. As the last U.S. election proved, the reality of how corruption impacts our lives trumps the power of lies. With respect to solidarity, Government Accountability Project tries to achieve that through legal campaigns where we serve as matchmakers between the isolated whistleblower and all the stakeholders in society who should be benefiting from their knowledge if we only knew what was being done to us. And when that happens, instead of a corrupt bureaucracy surrounding an isolated whistleblower, it's society surrounding that bureaucracy, and the truth becomes power. And I'd like to just put an exclamation point. The media is indispensable partners in alerting the public of the evidence that whistleblowers raise. Well, finally, how can we increase our leverage? Well, by rolling up our sleeves for a lot of hard work. We have to continue passing metal shields and upgrade the cardboard ones. But even more fundamental, for rights to take root requires oversight and participation, active oversight and participation by civil society on the implementation of the existing laws. That means training for beneficiaries and enforcers so that they understand the new rights and they accept them. There has to be a parallel public education campaign to overcome deep-seated cultural bias against whistleblowers by spotlighting the consequences, how they're making a difference in the lives of ordinary citizens. And these tactics work. For example, in Serbia, they had town hall meetings all across the country before they passed the law. After it was passed, they had a requirement that you couldn't be a judge in a case unless you completed whistleblower training. That all the people who are the whistleblower officials to enforce the law got that training. As a result, not only does Serbia have one of the best laws on paper, 80% of people are winning their cases when they assert their rights. Or in the United States, where whistleblowers were long considered kind of kooks or traitors. Now the latest Marist poll shows that 86% of our citizens want stronger whistleblower rights. Now, I'm not qualified to say if we're winning the war against corruption, but as seen from these examples, whistleblowers are winning the key battles. And that's why our global legal revolution has been relentless and it's going to be irreversible. But with public solidarity, it can be unstoppable.
Thank you so much, Tom, on this. Again, very positive statement and calling on for solidarity, which is at the core of the IACC. We have received a few questions, which I would like to, we have about 10 minutes to go, and I would like to turn to some of you. Maybe let me start this for Patrick. And Patrick, in your investigations, you've also been working with various groups and in trying to generate awareness. How do you view the concentration of mass media? Do you see the need for different funding mechanisms for investigative and local journalism, or an international fund for independent media, for example?
Yes, I think that's a great question, and I completely agree. I think there should be a mobilization of funds for exactly those things. I think one of the things that's been really disturbing over the last quite a few years now is how mainstream media, which very often had fantastic investigative units, have scaled those down. I think the quality of media overall has gone down, with some notable exceptions, of course. That means that a lot of existing investigative journalists found themselves without work or without budgets to do their work. Various NGOs, including Global Witness, have hired those people. It's been very good for us in the sense to be able to get journalists like that working for us. But for journalists sort of coming into the environment now, yeah, I mean, there's just not enough money around. And as I hope I illustrated in my talk, we desperately need this investigative journalism, the same as we need the whistleblowers that Tom was talking about. Without that, we can't hold anyone to account. And I think that various philanthropies, Ford Foundation and others, are making money available. That needs to go up, and we need to really mobilize those kinds of funds.
Thank you for that. And maybe also in the context of strengthening journalism, a question for Juliana. Within the Mexican political landscapes that you've described, what tools can journalists use to connect, and also how difficult it is to fight the mainstream media on topics that do not receive enough coverage?
Well, Maria Teresa, of course, explained so many examples about how independent journalism can get stronger. I believe that, at least in Carmen's story, what happened to her is that she did this battle for freedom of speech, and she managed to get really independent. The end of her story is that now she went online, and this is also something that's very particular to this era, because she used to go on the regular radio airways, but during the censorship, she managed to put her show, her radio program, online. And what happened after President Peña Nieto left is that one huge media group is now broadcasting her signal from the internet to the radio, to the normal radio airways, which are free in Mexico. So now Carmen is totally independent, but she has the strength of a huge radio group that can just airway her signal, but she doesn't have the pressure that she used to have, and why all the scandal went on. So this also was possible because of all the help of so many journalists in Latin America, because they supported her during this battle. And not only the other journalists, but lawyers. All of her legal battle was held because a group of lawyers decided to work for her pro bono, because they thought that her battle was a battle for freedom of speech, and that it was important not only for Mexican society, but for journalism in general. So this support also from the legal aspect of this group of lawyers was, of course, very, very important in order for her and her team to let's say, win the battle. So they have managed to raise enough money, let's say, through, at least in the beginning, through just streaming through the internet, by collecting the money by the by YouTube, by the advertising that is online, and raising little by little the platform, and then doing the the link with this big radio media group just to airway, but the content is totally decided by them.
Thank you for that. And maybe I'll turn to Maria Teresa with a question that follows up on this and looks at the polarization that exists in Colombia related between quality and accessible information as well, and news that is influenced by political ties. Basically, first of all, the question is are there investigations into this? And secondly, how can we promote quality news more? Maria Teresa.
Sorry. So I think that we are, this is only about Colombia, but I think it could be extrapolated to many countries. As you know, Mexico is incredibly polarized. Brazil, it's like divided in half. El Salvador has a terrible situation now with very extreme politics. Venezuela, well, 5 million of its inhabitants are outside the country, completely opposed to the government, and the government completely has squashed any kind of critical dissent, and so on and so forth. So we do have a very polarized, and part of that polarization has to do, of course, with the disinformation and the confusion, the deliberate confusion used by politicians. We've had politicians, and in Colombia, they've been incredibly creative, so much so that they were even helping Trump in the US produced false information in Florida to get him voters. And this was tied to our politicians which are in the governing party in Colombia. And we knew about this because of investigative journalism. So I think that the journalists in my country and in many other countries are fighting that fight. Now, maybe that question wasn't very clear, but it has a little bit of a taint that there are, of course, media outlets that are serving these kinds of disinformation campaigns. And unfortunately, in Latin America, there are some of the media, some of them basically because they have no interest, no money, they become very like what we call lazy journalism, and they just produce whatever anybody says, and they just, whatever gives you clicks, they just reproduce. But in other cases, there are media outlets that are openly creating false news, knowingly that they are false news. And these are some of them traditional media that somehow have a little bit more credibility. So I do think there is a new cadre of small, very combative, investigative journalists in Colombia and in many countries in Latin America. And as we said before, that's what's going to make a big difference. And it already has the trust of people. So in Colombia, there was a big media that, expelled or, pushed most of its journalists outside, and a lot of them had set up their own media, and now they have more clicks than even the original media. So I think people are divided, but there's a lot to do there.
There is interest for quality information. Thank you, Maria Teresa, on that. We have 2 minutes to go, and I'd like to have give 1 minute to Ms. Jung, if possible. Tom spoke about the power of whistleblowing are winning many battles, and they're winning the battle against corruption. Do you see the same happening in Korea?
앞에 발표에서도 얘기가 많이 나왔는데 그렇죠.
That is right.
한국은 제도는 어느 정도 갖춰져 있는 것 같습니다.
So we do have some institutions already established in Korea. So the point now is how stronger we can protect them further in the future. So the role of public interest reporters is to disclose the corruption inside those organizations. But in addition to that, as we have more and more public interest reporters or whistleblowers, the culture will change. We already talked previously that we have the act on the protection of the whistleblowers, and it shows the importance of having these people in our society, and we become better aware of them. And I told you that many Korean citizens participated in the anti-corruption movements. It's because of the power of public interest reporting or whistleblowing, and that is why people participated more and more. That is why we must engage even in more active way.
Thank you so much. And unfortunately, we have to close this part of this discussion to move on to the anti-corruption awards. But maybe let me try to sum up some couple of takeaways. I think all of you have spoken about the power of solidarity, in the people, solidarity for participatory democracy, in the fight for whistleblower protection, but also in journalism, the new way of doing journalism, but also cooperation with with civic groups and with other parts of society that can help us in this fight, and how this is key. We have looked at how problematic the platforms have become and how the steps that we need to take in order to turn these incredibly powerful machines into something that is there also to support the rights and the systems that we need to support. And finally, we have heard about the case of some incredible journalists that in Mexico in particular, but across the world, that have done very important work in revealing corruption and gain the trust of the people. I would like to thank all the speakers for their incredible contribution to this, for helping us understand where to go next, what we need to do. And I would like to also thank the organizers of this amazing panel that you have put together. And with this, I will pass it on to Delia Ferreira Rubio, Chair of Transparency International, for the Anti-Corruption Award ceremony. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, everyone, for this very interesting panel. Congratulations. Really important panel. And welcome, everybody, to the Anti-Corruption Award ceremony. I am Delia Ferreira. I am the chair of Transparency International. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I will ask the producers to show us the video about the award, the Anti-Corruption Award.
We have a political system that strives on corruption, survives on corruption. We need to show that we have the ability to fight for what is right.
Even in the midst of fear and disillusionment, there are those who struggle for justice and integrity. They are the protagonists of change.
Fighting against corruption is just proper doing your job. And when you are chief of some institution, you have to think about your people.
Transparency opens a window to citizens and residents to see what exactly is happening.
Politicians collude in covering this up. The big corporations that pay bribes collude in covering it up. If journalists independently don't try and uncover it, then nobody will.
Through individual endeavors, through international legal tools, it is possible to make a big difference and to curb corruption.
Thank you very much. Since 2000, the Anti-Corruption Award recognizes the courageous attitude and the work done by journalists, activists, whistleblowers, which really play a great and important role in the fight against corruption, in the fight against injustice, in all parts of the world, many times risking their lives and their freedoms. This year, the 4 shortlisted candidates were selected from a long list of nominees of 228 candidates, and TI received, mainly from members of the public, more than 400 candidacies for this award. The 4 shortlisted candidates were announced last week, and they are Ana Gomes from Portugal. She's an ambassador and a former member of the European Parliament. Bolortuja Chulum Batar, who is a journalist in Mongolia. Botakos Kobayeva, who is the former vice rector for Financial and Economic Affairs at the Kazakh National Conservatory, and Saki Darjavi and the newspaper Etilat Roz from Afghanistan. Before we present the awards and you hear the famous "and the award goes to," I would like to invite Barbara Triomfi, who has been conducting the plenary from International Press Institute, and also my friend Matthew Caruana Galizia, who is an activist fighting against corruption and the son of the awardee who received the award in 2018. And also I would like to invite my colleague, the chair of the committee, the board of Transparency International, in charge of the award, Samuel Kimeu. Please put on your cameras and join us here. Both Barbara and Matthew were part of the committee this year. Barbara, what was your experience with the award committee, and why do you think it is important to have this kind of recognition for journalists, activists, or whistleblowers?
Thank you, Delia. And well, I think that, you know, this conference, the IACC conference, provides a very clear evidence that the fight against corruption draws its strength from the synergy of different actors, and that we need to work all together cooperatively in order to generate public pressure, to shed light on corruption, and to ensure that those responsible for it don't get away with impunity. And you know, and while this is true, there is the need for, the panel before highlighted the need for solidarity, for cross-border and so on. But yet, very often, when you look at the individuals who make a difference in these fights, very often they work alone. They find themselves working alone with profound dedication, facing immense risks, but very, very often, far too often, without the support of the institutions and the society whose interests they are in fact defending. So in working also with the Commission last year, what I noticed is really not only, of course, the incredible work that each single one of the nominees has been carrying out, but also how many of them were so shocked, so impressed that an international organization like the IACC would notice them, because they're not used to the level of international attention that IACC and the Anti-Corruption Award can give to them. They're used to working in hostile environment where, also even very often most of the society against them, they're scared to be friends with them. So I think that the Anti-Corruption Award is so important exactly because of this. It shows not only the incredible risks and obstacles that they constantly face, but also the inadequacy of our system in providing support to those who fight for corruption. And it's also important, I also think the ACA is an important moment every year to reflect on our values, on our aspirations, our striving for justice, for transparency, for accountability as the pillars of the societies in which we want to live, and how each of us can contribute to that, and how by supporting those who make a difference, but also by trying to make a difference ourselves. And finally, also working with looking into the process of the Anti-Corruption Award. I think that, it's also important not only for the recognition we give to the award winners, but also to the community of those who work with them. First of all, it's an opportunity to let their enemies know that the international community stands behind them, that we are ready to protect them if they are to be attacked. But also to let their friends know that they should be proud of them, to show who our heroes are and who the role models should be to inspire us. And in that sense, I think it's so important to have this moment to really reflect on all this in the context of this conference, where we talk about a lot of strategies about working together and all of that, but then to stop for a moment and really honor those who have and do this, those who have made a difference, and do this by facing great danger. Thank you, Delia.
Thank you. I fully agree with you, and that's the purpose that Transparency International has when creating this Anti-Corruption Award. Matthew, it's a pleasure to see you again. Thank you for joining us. What does this award means to you and your family? And tell us, is it important for you as activists to have this kind of recognition, to have this kind of award to colleagues given by a Transparency International organization?
Thank you, Delia. So the most important thing to me is that the award recognizes people who work in the weeds. They're fighting against people who are extremely dangerous, extremely corrupt, and they're often doing this in a way that's unrecognized by the global community, until it's often too late. Now, Barbara has made this point in a different way, that people like me, my family, this year's award winners, they depend on a kind of global support network of NGOs, other activists, journalists who are documenting what they're doing or following up on what they're doing. Oftentimes, unfortunately, who are following up on what they're doing when they're already dead, which is the case for my mother, where my mother, I guess, is supported in death by a group of journalists working on the Daphne project. And those journalists are in turn supported in their work by organizations like IPI, by the funding that comes from the European Commission for investigative work. So we're really part of this global network, and being a part of that is necessary. So I think the award this year welcomes new people to this global network. People who, I suppose, like my mother, have been working in silence or doing their work without most people across the world knowing that they're doing that. So to me, it's a way of welcoming these people to this kind of global stage, and that global stage offers some protection.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you both, Barbara and Matthew, for participating in the committee award, which has lots of work in selecting the awardees. And now I will hand over to the chair of the award committee, my colleague Samuel Kimeo. Samuel, to you. You are muted.
Sorry. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much, Delia, for the opportunity. My name is Samuel Kimeo, and I have had the pleasure of chairing the Anti-Corruption Award Committee this year. Let me begin by thanking the committee members for their dedication and commitment to the process that leads us to this place this evening. These committee members included Tatiana Bazzicelli from the Disruption Network Lab, Sally Hayden, who is a journalist, Matthew Caruana Galicia, who's just spoken to us, and from the TI board, we had Linda Ofori Kwafo, David Ondraka, and Karen Usman. This year, we had a difficult job of assessing a large volume of submissions, all of them recognizing hugely impactful, sustainable, and courageous work of corruption fighters across the globe. Following the committee's recommendations, the TI board would like to present the Anti-Corruption Award 2020 to two nominees who have worked tirelessly to expose, challenge, and end corruption. They have also shown inspirational determination to overcome many drawbacks. They have also shown large amounts of bravery, particularly in environments that they have been open to violence and persecution. Above all, they both send a message to governments, authorities, and people in power that corruption has no place in our societies, and that journalists, whistleblowers, and other anti-corruption activists continue to be instrumental in the fight against corruption. The board would also like to pay tribute to Li Wenliang, the whistleblower from Wuhan Central Hospital in China, who sadly passed away after contracting COVID-19, for his role in alerting authorities of the virus. The work he did on COVID should be celebrated, and the Transparency International movement pledges to focus on COVID-19 recovery-related issues and on the theme of vaccines and treatment development, purchase and distribution, which present high risks of corruption. So now, please could the support team play video number 2 as I introduce the first recipient of the Anti-Corruption Award 2020, Zaki Dariani and the Etilat Rose newspaper.
To begin, I must tell you about the dream I had to launch an independent, bold, and courageous media organization in Afghanistan. I began my journey just as my birthless Jaghori was waking up from years of war, poverty, and famine inflicted by the Taliban. As Afghanistan began a new chapter in its polluted history in the aftermath of the September 11 attacks, and the village school doors reopened, my childhood aspiration was clear: attaining higher education in order to help alleviate the ills of my people in my country. That's why I studied law and political science in 2012. When I graduated with no money but many dreams, I established Italaatros newspaper. As a proper entrepreneur, I had to borrow money from my relatives so I could finally publish the first volume, a newspaper filled with humor and entertainment. In less than a year, the money I had borrowed ran out. No one was entertained by my humor, and no company signed contract to advertise in my newspaper. Even my mother decided to give all the newspaper to a bakery, so at least the sheets could be usable to wrap bread in. After several months of interruption, I resumed publishing Italaatros, this time with more analysis of the political situation and less humor and entertainment. The newspaper continued while its existence was always at risk. As my debts mounted, I persisted and turned my focus on two specific issues: investigating corruption and providing a platform to Afghans to tell their stories. In 2017, The Guardian wrote that our newspaper in Afghanistan punched more than its weight. Despite serious threats and cumbersome limitations, we have uncovered serious cases of corruption in the Afghan government, and we are constantly investigating and searching for disclosure of corruption. In a country where corruption is endemic, there's always a tendency to go after the small and the least powerful. Every morning that I say goodbye to my wife and children, I know it could be my last, but I believe for the sake of my children and the Afghan people, this is a fight worth fighting. It has been my passion and will always be. Democracy, monitoring and reporting corruption, the consolidation of human rights and modern values, and the denial of ethnic and racial conflicts are among the goals and values of Italaatros. Today, this media has about 30 brave employees and work in 3 languages: Persian, Pashto, and English. So yes, I made my dream come true: an independent, bold, courageous, and honest journal in Afghanistan, my beloved home. I'm Zaki Daryabi, this is Italaatros, and this is our story.
First, I want to thank you, TI, which honored me and Italaatros team for Anti-Corruption Award for 2020. Second, we at Italaatros believe that this award makes us more responsible to fight against corruption and fight for a transparent country. I hope Italaatros and TI team and the global initiative against corruption could work together for a transparent Afghanistan, and I hope that one day our country rise from the most or second or third corrupt country to the first 15 transparent country. The real celebration is that day, and I wish we can do that.
We are now pleased to be joined by Zaki Daryabi. Zaki, if you can, please unmute yourself and turn your camera on. Welcome and congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, what motivates you to fight corruption?
First, I want to thank you from the TI team and I in Italy are very delighted and honored to receive this award. I want to congratulate to my friends who are nominated for this award. I think the most important thing that motivates us to work against corruption is that we are witnessing widespread corruption in the government, from corruption in the provision of services to corruption in government contracts, in corruption in the requirement process in the government institutes. This hurts us, so we fight it. Second, the widespread corruption in Afghan government has created endless vulnerabilities for the people of Afghanistan. People face difficulties due to high level of corruption. They face corruption even when they demanding basic services from government, such as taking or obtaining an ID card from the government. This is the short questions what motivated us for fighting against corruption.
Thank you for the good work that you are doing. And what could you say has helped you accomplish what you have done so far?
First, Italy experience. The shortcomings of Italy have been the result of corruption and discrimination in this country. We still face in our media work, and this discrimination stems from widespread corruption. Second, Italy's professional and courageous team also helped the newspaper succeed in its media work. Third, we have the support of the people in Italy's sponsors who have helped us with our mission. More importantly, what has helped us is the atmosphere for free media in Afghanistan, which is the result of support and pressure from the international community.
And how is this award going to be helpful to your work?
As I said, this award brings more responsibility for us in the first place. Understanding this responsibility make us work harder. So yes, with winning this award, we will have more responsibilities, and those we will have to work harder and more professional. Second, the award also showed that our work can be seen, that there are institutions and networks in the world that stand with us and value our works. This gives us more hope and corruption. Winning this award, more media and non-media institutions will now work with Italy to fight corruption. And I think we can do that.
And Zaki, how do you see the way forward for your country and the work of Etilat? Zaki, do you get me?
Hello?
Do you hear me, Zaki? Okay, I think we've probably lost Zaki, but congratulations, Zaki and Etilat Rose. I think we'll now move quickly to introduce the second recipient of the International Anti-Corruption Award 2020. Please could the support team play video number 4 as I introduce Botakos Kopbayeva.
To tell you my story, I have to share with you how my dream job became my worst nightmare. I was born in the sunny city of Almaty. I grew up in the time of the Iron Curtain, confident in the inviolability of my country, but also feeling isolated from the world. My mother raised my brother and me alone and taught us the importance of hard work. So I became an economist and most of my life worked for government agencies. In 2017, I ended up being the Vice Chancellor for Economic Affairs of Kurmangazi, the Kazakh National Music University. When I started my job focusing on the financial situation of the university, I discovered that most of the documents presented to me by the accounting department were inaccurate. My attempts to figure out the reasons for what I believe were errors led to a conflict with the staff on the accounting department and with the chancellor. 4 months later, in August 2017, 2 men broke into my home and attacked me with a knife, causing the several injuries. They wanted to intimidate me. They wanted me to quit. Unfortunately, police did not investigate this criminal case thoroughly, and the criminals went unpunished. 6 months after the attack, I began to state and feel dizzy. Since I was not only stabbed with a knife, but also hit heavily on the head. Despite my poor health, I did not quit my job and continued my investigation. This resulted in criminal charges for the theft of 127 million tenge intended for student scholarship. In the end, the former chief accountant of the university was sentenced to 8 years in prison, and the investigation revealed that the amount of funds misappropriated could be up to 377 million tenge. I'm not afraid to speak up about corruption, but somewhere inside me there is a feeling of fear for my life. Now I'm deprived of the opportunity to work and I'm supported by my retired mother. I live in isolation because I do not want to put those who are dear to me at risk. I considered myself unable to enter into a romantic relationship because I cannot be sure that my struggle will not harm my chosen one. Corruption can be found in any country, but it can be defeated only the people are not indifferent and do not turn a blind eye to it. I believe in the future of my country and will help to fight evil as much as I can. I'm Butagos Kopbayeva and this is my story.
Здравствуйте, уважаемые участники конференции. Для меня большая честь быть удостоенной этой, без преувеличения, высокой награды. Я очень признательна членам правления Transparency International и комитету по наградам Transparency International за то, что вы отметили мою историю, одну из многих действительно достойных восхищения историй. Я верю в то, что эта награда поможет мне еще более эффективно бороться с самым главным злом современного мира, с коррупцией. Благодарю вас, желаю вам успехов, здоровья. Пусть наш мир становится чище.
We are now very pleased to be joined by Botakos Kopbayeva. And Botakos, if you can please unmute yourself and turn on your camera. And for those in the call, yes, Botakos is likely to speak in Russian, so check for your translation button so that we can interact with her briefly. Congratulations, Botakos.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was very big surprise for me. And, не знаю, я очень благодарна. Я думаю, что в моей стране многие люди будут рады за меня сегодня. Спасибо. Thank you.
So, what motivates you to fight against corruption, Botakos?
Это любовь к моей родине, конечно. Я патриот своей страны. Я хочу, чтобы все те богатства, которыми владеет моя страна, Казахстан, одна из богатейших стран мира, чтобы они направлялись на развитие, экономический рост, чтобы мы оставили своим потомкам богатую, красивую, процветающую страну. Поэтому я борюсь с коррупцией.
I'm not sure whether we are getting translation.
Oh, sorry. I don't know what can I do, but my English not enough. I'm sorry. About my country, of course. For my country, I do it.
Yeah, you can just I think the translation now is working, so we can still move ahead, Botakos. Could you just tell us what has helped you accomplish what you have done so far?
Я думаю, что основных результатов и главных результатов, на которые я ориентировалась, я, к сожалению, не достигла.
So what I have target is that, well, I have not achieved my targets yet.
Руководство антикоррупционного ведомства моей страны обратило внимание на системную коррупцию в отраслях культуры, спорта и туризма.
About the corruption, well, the governments are starting to have their interests, and the anti-corruption agencies are expected to do more active activities, anti-corruption activities. And as I'm an economist and as I'm advocating this anti-corruption, as far as I can, I'm going to be involved in the reporting activities. So I hope that many people will have a higher level of interest in this anti-corruption.
And how is the award going to help you in your work?
Sorry?
How is the award going to help you in your work?
Дело в том, что я первый раз в жизни удостоена международной награды.
So, well, this is my first time to receive this prestigious award, so I'm not sure how I feel yet, but well, I have this trust in my heart and I'm now working on this. But I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I hope that I will get more support to do these kind of activities. I know that I'm not alone, and I hope that I will get support and cooperation from others as well. And I would like to receive more and make more achievements in the future.
Okay, how do you see the way forward for your work and for your country?
Я хотела бы делать то, что я люблю.
So I want to do what I really love to do, and I hope that I will be more effective too. I will be able to help the country to use these kind of resources in a more effective way. And I hope that these will not be used for personal interest in the future. So that is what I want to advocate in the future. And I have worked in the ministries in charge of the financial and economy, and I'm sure that these budgets should be used and executed in a more appropriate manner. So I believe that these should not be used for the personal interest in the future. So I'm going to do my best to support in this way. And if I get any opportunity, I will do my best so that I can help the country to go in a better and more accurate direction. Thank you.
Меня так и не показывают.
Yeah, thank you very much, Botakos, and congratulations once again, and keep the faith in the positive outcome for your country and the fight against corruption. And also congratulations and thank you for joining us, Zaki, representing yourself and the Etilat Rose newspaper. So we have now come to the end of the session. And on behalf of the TI board, I would like to congratulate the Anti-Corruption Award winners 2020 and thank the committee members for their work. Barbara and Matthew, thank you for joining us today and everyone behind the scenes. I would also like to thank Exiga for the excellent due diligence work that they have continued to do in supporting these awards. And we look forward to continue working with you. Transparency International will continue to do as much as we can to support the work of anti-corruption campaigners across the globe, so that together we can hold power to account for the common good. Thank you very much, and congratulations to the winners.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you for your mention also. And I also would like to congratulate all the awardees. And it was so impressive work. And I hope you guys can work together in your future. Thank you very much. And I'd like to inform you for tomorrow's program. Plenary 3 will proceed under the theme of collective action for trust and integrity at 1 p.m. Greenwich time and at 10 p.m. Korean time. So we would like to ask for your continuous support and interest for this session. And please stay tuned. Thank you very much and have a good night to viewers who are in Korean, and have a great day for all the attendees in the world. Thank you very much. Thank you all for our attendees. Have a great day. Goodbye. 수고하셨습니다.